As I've mentioned in the series on the top 10 killers, there are medical words that we hear all the time, but we may not actually know what they are, what it means to have heart disease, what it means to have kidney disease. And today's topic, I think, is the one that seems like we know what it is, but exactly understanding it is something that eludes us sometimes. And it's very important because this is one that even when it happens, the disastrous effects are still avoidable. We're talking about strokes today on the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast.
Welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast
with Garrett Williamson.
Health, wellness, exercise, nutrition, and a whole lot more. Got questions? Call us and leave a message at 251-278-EDGE or message us at Personal Edge Fitness on Facebook and Instagram, at Team PE on Twitter, or personaledgefitness.com.
Good day and welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Garrett Williamson. I'm president of Personal Edge Fitness, and we're continuing our series today on 4 of the top 10 killers that are highly avoidable. Now, we've already discussed 3 others, and this is the final in this series, and we're covering stroke today. But before I get going, I want to let you know how to get in touch with us. I really appreciate the feedback we've gotten on this series and also the questions that we've gotten with all of our podcasts, especially this series. If you have a question about this or any other podcast, or as I always say, if you have a question dealing with anything in health, fitness, or wellness that seems to have a lot of misinformation around it. I call it myths, but misinformation around it. And you have a question about that, please reach out to us at area code 251-278-3343. That's 251-278-EDGE. You can also contact us via my email address, which is Garrett, Garrett, at personaledgefitness.com. Now, there's also our website, personaledgefitness.com, quite a bit of information about Personal Edge, and there's also a link that if you want more information, you can contact us there. And that is also, if you choose social media, Personal Edge Fitness is our Facebook page, and you can reach out to us on Twitter at Team PE. I have to say something about my lack of knowledge when I was a kid dealing with this particular topic. I used to get stroke and heart attack confused. I would hear that a friend of ours, an acquaintance of ours, had suffered a stroke. The same thing about suffering a heart attack. And I literally thought those two were the same thing. And of course, as I grew up, and especially when I started studying fitness and received my master's degree in it, even before that, of course, I could decipher the two. But there's a reason why I was confused about that. And if you were ever confused about that, well, there's a reason why. There's a lot of commonalities between, and there's one major commonality between a stroke and a heart attack. Now, if you remember from the other podcast, I would usually give you a full description of what the condition is, and then I would break it down and simplify it. Well, believe it or not, I'm going to start it in reverse, because when I was trying to get just a basic definition of a stroke, it simplified it right there. It's pretty easy, and you're going to see here. An ischemic stroke, which is the most common form of stroke, occurs when the blood supply to part of the brain is interrupted or reduced, and this prevents the brain tissue from getting oxygen and nutrients, and brain cells start to die within minutes. You see the simplicity there. And what I mean by that is that if you remember when we were talking about heart disease, we got into this long description about heart disease, and then I simplified it. I said heart disease is basically blood blockage. And in heart disease, the difference between heart disease and stroke is heart disease is blood blockage to the heart, involving the heart. A stroke is blood blockage involving the brain. I'm really boiling it down, making it simple, but that's basically what we're looking at, blood blockage to the brain. Now, you've got a couple of different types of stroke. There are basically 3 main types. There's transient ischemic attack, also known as the TIA. There's ischemic stroke, and there's hemorrhagic stroke. I'm going to have trouble with that word. I always try to put an F in there, I know, but it's hemorrhagic stroke is the 3rd type of stroke. The most common, like I say, is ischemic. It's estimated that 87% of strokes are ischemic. Now, let's start off with the first one. I said the transient ischemic attack. You've heard of that. It's called a TIA. And you may have known of somebody that's actually suffered from a TIA. You may have had a TIA yourself. Doctors call the transient ischemic stroke or attack, a TIA. They call it a warning or a mini stroke. And this is anything that temporarily blocks blood flow to the brain. That's what causes a TIA. If you have a TIA, then you have a high percentage of having an ischemic stroke later. In a TIA, the blood clot and TIA symptoms last for a very short period of time. Like I say, it's a temporary blockage. Now, let's try it here. Hemorrhagic, I got it right. Stroke. This results when a blood vessel in your brain ruptures or breaks and spilling blood into surrounding tissue. There are three main types of hemorrhagic stroke. I don't want to go too deep into this, but the first is an aneurysm. This causes a portion of a weakened blood vessel to balloon outward and sometimes rupture. The other is a arteriovenous malformation, which involves abnormally formed blood vessels. If these blood vessels rupture, again, then you've got blood blockage to the brain, and that's what they call a hemorrhagic stroke. Also, very high blood pressure can cause this to happen. It can cause the blood vessels to weaken, just putting so much pressure on it. It's like a garden hose sitting in the sun with a lot of high pressure going through it. You leave it turned on for a long time, and you can have a blowout, and that's basically what happens in a hemorrhagic stroke. Third, and the most common, like I said, 87% of strokes are ischemic. This occurs when a blood clot keeps blood from flowing to your brain. The blood clot is often due to what they call atherosclerosis. You've heard arteriosclerosis and you've heard atherosclerosis. Arteriosclerosis is when you have a hardening of the artery. The arteries get hard, therefore they become less pliable, so they don't open up, therefore increasing blood pressure and causing a blowout, more like in your hemorrhagic stroke. The atherosclerosis, and you've heard of atherosclerosis dealing with heart disease also. This is when a buildup of fatty deposits. This is what we call plaque. They build up in the inner lining of the blood vessel and they start to close it off. And sometimes a piece of that breaks off and causes blockage. It causes TIA, can cause ischemic stroke if the blockage stays there. Like I say, the concept is very similar to a heart attack. That's why I say these are so closely related. It's just that they affect different parts of the body. Ischemic stroke can be embolic, meaning the blood clot travels from another part of your body and ends up lodged in the brain. It's a blockage that could have caused a problem somewhere else, like a clot or what have you, but it broke off and it traveled up into the brain, and that's where the blockage occurs and therefore causes a TIA or causes a stroke. What are the symptoms of a stroke? This is something I hope you've seen before. And if not, you can get these things. I think in the National Institute of Health, you can get these posters. They're great. They're Be Fast posters, and they talk about the symptoms that are related to a stroke. And something interesting, I was speaking to a physician about this. My favorite physician to contact, who is Dr. Garrett Williamson, happens to be my brother. He's a internal medicine physician up in Chattanooga. And I was speaking to him about this since he's on the front lines. He deals with patients that have strokes. He sees this, I'm sure he sees this quite often. I was asking him, what do you want people to know? What is something that, I wish everybody knew that about dealing with strokes? And he said the symptoms of a stroke are basically not something happening, but the lack of something occurring, which I thought was very interesting the way he said that. Going back to that poster, and I'll talk more about that in a second. It's called a Be Fast poster because Be Fast is an acronym, and it stands for balance, eyes, face, arm, speech, and time. Be Fast. So balance, loss of balance. A sudden loss of balance can be the sign of a stroke. Loss of vision. Because in your brain, you've got portions of your brain that, of course, control vision. If you have blood blockage to that portion, you're going to lose your vision. So all of a sudden loss of vision can be a symptom of a stroke. Facial drooping. The face just all of a sudden starting to droop a bit. You'll see this in a friend, and they may or may not feel it, but their face will start to droop, and that's a sign of a stroke. Arm weakness, inability to raise your arm, lift your arm, move your arm, what have you, can be a sign of a stroke. Speech difficulty. A lot of times they tell you if you're trying to check somebody if they're having a stroke or not, tell them to stick their tongue out, and they can't do that. They have difficulty to do that, or they're not able to talk. That is showing you that the portion of the brain that does control speech has been affected, and you've got some blockage there. You've got the sign of a TIA. You've got a sign of a stroke. So, and the last one, I like to have this on here because it's not a symptom, but it's extremely, extremely important. And it's great to know. I've had friends that knew about this last one and actually probably saved their lives. And that's time. Be Fast, the last letter is a T, and it stands for time. And the reason being is that when you have blockage to the cells of the brain, you can cause damage quickly. The cells start to die off quickly. But if you can get medical attention and quick, then you can keep those disastrous effects that can come with a stroke. You can interrupt, you can keep them from happening. I know of people that have had a TIA, had a stroke. A particular individual I know that was out walking and had a stroke was found on the ground by a stranger, and the stranger was smart enough to call 911, which is the thing to do. We'll get to that in a minute, but they called 911, and they were able to identify it. They were able to treat it immediately, and she had no lasting effects. She had maybe some temporary effects for the next few days, but no lasting effects for her. It basically saved her life, which was incredible. So time is the last of that Be Fast poster. Something I want to point out, and this I did not know this. My brother actually explained this to me, and I did not realize that. I thought that when you had a stroke, or you had evidence of brain blockage, the first thing you'd get was a headache, and that's not true. It is a symptom. A sudden, severe headache, which sometimes can be accompanied by vomiting, dizziness, altered consciousness, may indicate that you're having a stroke. But there's not always a headache associated with a stroke. I never realized that. I figured for sure that you would have some sort of a pressure to the brain, what have you. This is something that FDR experienced shortly before he passed. Some of his last words were, I have an awful headache. The balance thing, again, just something to remember about balance. You don't have to be on a balance beam and fall off to realize balance is off. Just trouble walking can be the symptoms of a stroke. But the thing to remember here, most importantly, is time. They say when it deals with a stroke, minutes matter. I mean, you want to seek medical attention as quick as possible. Obviously, you want to do that with any of these conditions, but especially with the stroke. And here's why. If you can get to the hospital within 3 hours of the first symptoms of an ischemic stroke, you may get a type of medication called thrombolytic. The classification of the drug, the type of drug is called a thrombolytic, and it's actually a clot-busting drug, which will break up the clots. And if you can get to a hospital that is a stroke center, that's very important. In Mobile, we have a few of them, USA, Mobile Infirmary, Providence. They are stroke centers, and so they can administer this drug, usually to be classified as a stroke center. Don't quote me on this, but from the reading that I've done on it, what classifies them as stroke center, they've got a neurologist basically on staff there. I believe that is the requirement for, one of the requirements for being a stroke center. But if you're able to get to one of those places within 3 hours, and 3 hours sounds like a lot of time, but you want to operate as fast as possible. The faster you can get there, the more the ability you have, of course, avoiding the damages of a stroke. And the damage of a stroke can be paralysis. That's probably the one that I see quite often. In fact, we've dealt with a lot of clients that have had strokes, and then we've had to basically teach them to use their arm again or teach them to walk again. That's one of the things I talk about, is that we've taught 3 people to walk again, and 2 of those were stroke victims. That's one thing you can avoid. If you have enough damage, you can affect the brain to basically cause damage and cause problems thinking, functioning, and get to a point even so bad that somebody can't care for themselves. That's why minutes matter. That's why it's so incredibly important as far as getting to seeking medical attention fast and being able to recognize those symptoms. That's why that poster is important. Being able to recognize those symptoms can help somebody. You can save a life. And I've heard of this happen more than one time. Preventing it. That's what we're really getting to here. I'd just rather just not have a TIA and not have any of these things. So an estimated 1/3 of people who experience a TIA will go on to have a full ischemic stroke within a year. And so knowing how to avoid TIA in the first place, adapting lifestyle changes, the things that you can do to keep from having that ischemic stroke a year later. The first thing is seeking treatment when you have those things, but more importantly, goes back to what I've talked about in all of the other top 10 killers, or the other 3 top 10 killers I've talked about. The number one risk factor of all these is obesity, which is why I call obesity the number one killer. I mean, obesity is the number one risk factor for each one of these 4. It happens to be number 9 for cancer. It happens to be number 7 for lung function, lung disease. And it's number 2 for dementia, believe it or not, is the risk factor. And so if you pull all that together, you're going to find out your number one killer really is obesity. As always, I don't mean to beat it to death. If I don't go through the full explanation today, it's mainly out of concern for those that have heard me talk about this over and over again. If you need more explanation about that, I've got several podcasts that talk about it. But the first way to avoid it is, of course, making sure, obesity is 30% or more body fat on a woman or 25% or more body fat on a man. Forget about BMI. BMI is worthless. It tells you nothing. It was a formula that was made up by a mathematician, statistician, and astronomer from 1832. It is a horrible measurement. I hate BMI. Do not use it. If you want the exact definition of obesity, it is 25% or more body fat for a male, 30% or more body fat for a female. First way to avoid the amounts, it's an amount problem, it's not a type problem, is, of course, stop putting the large amounts in. This goes to my whole talk, and you've heard my series. If you haven't heard it, I've got a series on the lie of food. In the lie of food, there's no such thing as bad food. There's just bad amounts. These amounts is what causes the problem. Obesity is an amount problem. And so the first thing is, hey, don't take in the large amounts. You want to keep from taking the large amounts? For those of you that are a fan of the podcast, you knew it was coming at some point in time. 40% of the reason why we overeat is lack of water. 60% of the reason why we overeat is stress. Lack of water is easy. Just take in 100 ounces a day every single day of your life, even National Don't Drink Water Day. It's recommended by the NIH, National Institute of Health, Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, Harvard Medical, Stanford Medical. You've heard me say this before. Another way, of course, is increasing exercise. Increasing exercise, of course, you're increasing calories going out. You're creating a much more healthy body. You're also alleviating stress. You're also making sure those vessels are more pliable. You're lowering blood pressure. These are all things that, of course, are preventing the risk factors associated with a stroke and all of the other 3 top 10 killers that I told you about. So those two, putting those together, this saves your life. Forget about washboard abs. Forget about the fact that you don't care about my dad bod. I don't care about my spare tire. Hey, that's fine. No problem, whatever. But do this to save your life. If nothing else, do this to save your life. Now, I've gone through this kind of quickly, I know. There's other information I have about a stroke. If you're interested in knowing or interested in having any questions about getting started on a program or basically saving your life by preventing this number one killer of obesity, please contact us, area code 251-278-3343. That's 251-278-EDGE. You can also reach out to me at Garrett, Garrett, at personaledgefitness.com. That, of course, is our website and our Facebook page. Now, today's podcast does conclude the talk on the 4 of the top 10 killers, which in my mind are almost 100% avoidable. If they are avoidable, if you do want to live longer, why not make sure we keep obesity under control? That's what we do here at Personal Edge Fitness, and it's one more way we help you live your level of wellness. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for listening to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast with Garrett Williamson. Subscribe now and be a part of the show by calling 251-278-EDGE or message us on Facebook and Instagram at Personal Edge Fitness or at Team PE on Twitter, and visit us at personaledgefitness.com.